Welcome once again to The Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. For decades, Latin music in New York City made its way from the streets of Spanish Harlem to become a breeding ground that grew and exploded to become a global phenomenon. From the glitzy New York mambo clubs in the 1940s and 50s, a new African-based Cuban music was melding into the city's vibrant big band jazz scene at the same time that a huge wave of Puerto Ricans was moving to New York. Nearly 900,000 between the mid-40s and mid-60s. The music helped Latinos forge a new distinctive voice and identity in their new home and community. It provided a rhythm and music that one could live by, breathe, and make love to. It was always about the use of drums. They enabled people to feel the rhythm and beat that kept them emotionally and culturally connected over time. It imitated the pulse of the life and community and was the essence of the music. A strong argument can be made that music and our musicians have done more to humanize relations than sociologists or philosophers, economists or politicians. They've developed and kept alive visions that have allowed us to be profound witnesses to our humanity, to truth, beauty, and goodness, to life and community. We're truly blessed and honored to have two iconic figures of that history on the Radical Imagination today. Bobby Sanabria was born in the Melrose Projects in the South Bronx and graduated from one of our most prestigious conservatories, the Berklee College of Music in Boston. He's a drummer and a percussionist who's taught and performed with every major figure of Latin jazz and salsa around the world. Every single one of his albums has been nominated for a Grammy, 8 in all. His latest, West Side Story Reimagined, also won the Jazz Journalist Award for Best Jazz Album of 2019. Bobby is also a composer, arranger, producer, conductor, community activist, and has been on the faculty of the New School, NYU, and the Manhattan School of Music. He's the host of the Latin Jazz Cruise on WGBGO Radio. Felipe Luciano was born in East Harlem and is one of the most dynamic Afro-Puerto Rican public figures and activists in the Latino community. He was one of the 4 members, and the only Puerto Rican, of the original Last Poets, a group composed of Black Power era poets and musicians who almost single-handedly laid the groundwork for the emergence of hip-hop. He helped found the New York chapter of the Young Lords, has been a 2-time Emmy Award-winning reporter, was the first Puerto Rican news anchor of a major network, and holds a master's degree in Christianity and social justice from Union Theological Seminary.
Do you believe that?
I believe it, and that's where we met a few years ago.
That's right.
He's the host of 2 shows on WBAI, Radio Latin Roots and What's Going On. So, here we are. I'm so honored and blessed and excited to have you both here. What's going on? That's a good way of starting this. What's going on?
This, that, and everything.
Yeah, this, that, and everything. But
First of all, let me compliment you on that preface.
Yeah.
On your introductory. It was poetry.
Well,
Who wrote
you're a
it?
poet.
Did you read it? Did you write it?
I read it, and I wrote it.
I think that you should seriously think about writing poetry. It was wonderful.
Well,
it was lyrical.
Try to do some writing.
It was metaphysical. It was very pretty. I think you should give it a shot. It was wonderful. And it said some of the things that I feel, that musicians have helped more Puerto Ricans to live and not commit suicide than anything else.
Wow.
Music has done it.
Wow.
It is not the church. It is not the Pentecostal church. It is not the Catholic church. Music. And if Tito Puente had not been here, you would have seen a lot more suicides in this city
Right.
if Tito Rodriguez had not been here, and of course the great Machito, who kept us alive. You got to understand, when you are under the oppression that we were under in Puerto Rico and here, and you are seen as a peasant, you're seen as someone who's not capable of cognitive ability,
Right.
you need to have something that you feel good about. When you look at the pictures of Puerto Ricans in the 50s, they are so sharp. They knew they were going to make it. They came here to succeed. They have their little pork pie hats. They have their cashmere overcoats, and always looking. The Park Plaza was the place. It was the Savoy Ballroom of our time. Soon enough, within 20 to 30 years, they realized that they were caught and that they were not being paid well, and they were treated like serfs. And slowly, our values began to deteriorate. And that's where the gangs come in, and that's where the drugs come in, and all the other stuff. But music was our salvation.
Most definitely.
And personally, you mentioned Pentecostal, and you were raised.
I was raised
within that,
Pentecostal.
and Catholic. You
Right.
were raised as a Catholic. But as we were talking about before the show, music literally saved your soul. Saved you.
Most definitely.
How-
I mean, it
how
was
did that
the it
work
was we were talking off camera in the pre-interview. My father, Jose, came to New York City in 1952
From where?
from Guanica, Puerto Rico, which is the city
Oh,
that
man.
the United States invaded in 1898.
That's right.
And
Wow.
it is a city that brought forth the great Yomo Toro, the virtuoso of the Puerto Rican mandolin-like guitar, the cuatro, our national instrument. It has 5 sets of double strings. Originally had 4 sets, hence the name cuatro.
Okay.
But we still retain the same name even though it has 5 sets now. But in any case, he came from a family of 15. Amazing, right? And my mother came from a family of 13 in 1955. My father in 52. They met in the South Bronx.
Oh, they met here. Okay.
They met
All
here,
right.
and the
We
rest
call
is
them the
history.
pioneros.
Yeah, but my father became the love that I have. Many of you watching this that know me personally know I have a supreme love of history, as Maestro Luciano does, and I got that from my father because he taught me that history is the most important aspect of one's life. You must know where you come from. You must know where you who you are so that you can know where you're going. And he taught me it in various humble, simple ways. My father was a machinist.
Yeah.
He dealt with calculations, et cetera, and he worked in Valley Stream, Long Island. It took him 2 hours to get to Valley Stream by the Long Island Railroad, 2 hours to come back, and he had a ritual. He would sit in a lazy boy chair, drink some Schaefer beer, smoke a cigarette, later on cigars, and he weaned himself off of that as well. And he listened to music from be it Ahmad Jamal, be it Count Basie, be it Machito, Petito Puente, Maestro Tito Rodriguez, Ramito, be it Harry Belafonte live at Carnegie Hall, be it I think I mention James Brown? I don't know
Yeah,
if I
you
did.
said that.
Yeah,
Said it
James
before,
Brown.
Yeah.
Everybody. I mean, everybody. And just to give you an example of how my father influenced me in terms of my love of history, the Bossa Nova hit the United States and the world in 1962 like a hurricane all over the world. It was the last great form of Latin American music that really became worldwide known. Some people would say reggaeton is,
No.
but
Bossa Nova was a phenomenon. It was
62.
worldwide.
So you were 5 years old at the time, and you were listening to this.
Yeah, I was born in 1957, so
Okay.
it's 1960. But this is 1962. But
Right.
1966, Sergio Mendes comes out with that famous album.
Yeah.
Herb Alba presents Sergio Mendes in Brazil,
Right.
66. So on AM radio, you heard whoa, whoa, why, opa, opa, opa. Más que nada, that George Ben composition, right? Beautiful samba. I'm listening to the lyrics and I'm going, wow, it sounds like Spanish, but it isn't Spanish because there's words like that is pronouncing in a different cadence, etc. And I asked my father, what is it that they're singing? You know, I know más que nada means more than nothing, but the rest of it I can't really understand what they're saying, you know. And he goes, you like it, right? He goes, yeah, I love it. He knew I liked it because I kept playing that 45 over and over again. And for those of you,
was he a musician too, or a would-be? No,
he
but
just
he just loved listening.
He just loved music. That was his therapy. People have to understand.
Yeah, good point.
When our parents had fights, or if you have a lover or whatever, you don't. We none of us went to therapy. We couldn't afford it. We didn't even know what that was. In fact, we were looked down upon if you tried to sit that out.
Local.
You were considered a punk. If
no more than that, you were considered crazy.
Well, there you go.
Crazy.
Just like Tony Soprano in The Sopranos, he feared that.
Yeah,
so they would find out that he was going to therapy. But in any case, what was our therapy? Putting on Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66, putting on Poinciana by Ahmad Jamal, putting on Harry Belafonte live at Carnegie Hall, etc. That was our therapy.
See, I had a very different
experience. What were you listening to?
Well, let me finish.
Let me finish
real quick.
Go ahead.
So that you know where I'm coming from. So anybody, my father goes to me, you know the reason you like it so much, right? Because he kept seeing that I would put the 45 on over and over again. And the other flip side was the song The Joker, which was a composition by Anthony Newley from a Broadway show at that time. So he goes, the reason you like it is get the globe over there. So I get the globe, I come over, and he points to Africa. He goes, the reason you like it so much is because the rhythm, right? Yeah. Right? Don't you like the rhythm a lot? He goes, yeah, it's happening. It's groovy, like which was the parlance of the day. He goes, those rhythms went to Portugal, went to southern Spain, went to
straight to Brazil.
Straight to Brazil, and also then he points to Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the rest of the Caribbean. He's giving me the whole history of the freaking transatlantic slave trade.
And then to the Bronx.
And then, of course, to the Bronx.
Wow.
And he goes, and that's inside of you. That's inside of you. Why do you think your grandmother, my mother, is black? Why do you think? You know? He's giving me this, like, he's telling me all of this stuff. And I'm like looking at him like my mouth is dropping open.
Yeah.
And I almost started to cry, and I hugged my father.
What a gift. What a gift he gave.
He exudes that.
Yeah.
We went to his funeral, his mother's funeral.
Right.
The place was international. There were black people, there were white people, there were Puerto Ricans. It was
Cubans, everybody, Venezuelans.
I'm not trying to be maudlin about this or morbid, but it was an international gathering of people who love him, and as a result, and some even knew his mother, and who loved what his mother did with him.
And my father.
And your father. Now, my experience was a little different. Because I was born in East Harlem, where everything started, Willie Bobo, Jimmy Sabatel, Joe Cuba, Tito Puente, Dandy Rodriguez, Manny Oquendo, you name
Charlie
Palmieri and Eddie from 12th Street, Joe Bataan, Johnny Colon, all of them, I was raised in the Crucible. So for me, music was air. There was no such thing as not understanding it. You were in it. But not only
it was all around you.
It was all around you.
In the streets,
now, in those days,
radios.
In those days, there used to be a guy named William B. Williams who had the Maple Leaf Ballroom
on WNEW.
That's right. In fact, when I was in jail, when there was ever a fight in the day room, what we call the day room, in order to quell the violence, the COs, we used to call them guards in those days, would put on Frank Sinatra. The guys would go, oh man, they couldn't take it. I loved it. Yeah. I would rather have them fighting so I could listen to Frank Sinatra and Count Basie with the Nelson Riddle Orchestra. I mean, it was wonderful. Now, my mother and father had a more traditional, more American side of it. My father loved Count Basie. He said, of all of the musicians, including Duke, he's the one who has the beat. He also loved Jimmy Smith. Isn't that interesting? An organ player.
Yeah.
He loved him. And Jimmy Smith is I would say, a Southern-based organist. I mean, it's deep. I don't know if you've ever seen him down the wild side. My mother liked Ella Fitzgerald. She was more lyrical.
So you were listeing to different things in Felipe. Were you listening to?
No. We were listening to the same thing because in those days, the pachanga was the big thing. First of all, it was Machito.
Okay.
Now I'm going to do this very quickly because I know he has his narratives are entrancing. I love listening to him. Machito was the guy. My grandmother couldn't stand him because he was risque. He would say things about sex.
This is your Pentecostal
sexual
mother.
positions.
Yeah.
Ay Jose así no es.
Double meaning
Ay
songs.
Jose a lo al revés. I mean, the things he said were
Dale jamón a la jeva.
dale jamón a la jeva.
Give
But
some
he
ham
also
to the
talked
gir-
about
to the
drugs.
lady.
He also talked about drugs. Everything. And World War II. He does a whole bunch of things. Frieslandia, for example. Now, my grandmother heard him, but she didn't dance to him. My mother loved him. I loved him. So there are three, and my kids love Machito. So there are three generations of Machito. And he used to live on 111th Street. 111. He would come here, and we saw him all the time in La Marqueta, the big market. It was like a mall.
Can you
Yes.
imagine that a superstar in our community, living in our community?
Yeah.
We didn't know that he was a superstar because he would say hello to everybody.
Right.
My mother loved Ella, and she loved Frank Sinatra. So I grew up with a big band sense of music. But whenever we heard Puente, whenever we heard Machito, our blood boiled because he was our guy. Now, because we were street kids, we kind of moved toward Joe Cuba more. Joe Cuba was the barrio band. And the things he did, Bang Bang,
Push, push.
El Pito,
Right. right.
More graphic in a way.
and
No, I would say that they were just street. He was in tune with the street. And plus,
okay.
Joe Cuba was from a generation that was influenced by doo-wop.
yes,
Because that band was just 6 guys, and they didn't use any horns. They would do what became known as chua, which was a style developed by a Cuban vocalist named Francisco Feyo Be, where he would scat sing and do horn lines like chua, 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 chua.
it was a softer line.
Yeah.
And
so
these
they
were-
would do harmonies,
Right.
horn lines with their voices
with
and vibes.
But
and
these
they
are
had
young
vibes.
kids, and in different high schools were developing all of this too.
No, believe it or not, we all were listening to the same thing.
Okay.
I saw Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers on 112th Street and 3rd Avenue. The first doo-wop band, the first doo-wop band that had Puerto Ricans and blacks. I mean, it didn't exist.
Had 2 Puerto Ricans in that
Two
group.
Puerto Ricans in that group. And I mean, Frankie Lyman was the rage. So we loved the music.
Frankie
and of
Lyman
course-
and the Teenagers.
and
Yeah.
the Teenagers. But we also loved
He was the next coming of
Presley.
people people like Sammy Davis.
That's right.
He was
Really?
Frankie Lyman was a very talented. He was a dancer. He was a singer. He was a entertainer. He had the audience in the palm of his hand, and he had youth on his side. Unfortunately,
He got caught up.
He got caught up in drugs, and he got taken advantage of by Morris Levy at
Leave
Roulette
Morris
Rec-
alone. He's dead now.
This is
at the sa-
Afro-Cuban.
but at the same time that
all right.
at
Yeah,
the
go
same
ahead.
time all that is happening,
Yeah.
I'm 65.
Right.
Maestro Luciano's 75. So
Right.
I'm growing up.
Why you want to tell my age, man?
He doesn't look
I
it.
wanna,
Both
I-
of them.
you don't look it, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
But
Yeah.
my generation was the last generation that was able to see people like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson
Oh my
on
God.
TV on shows like the Ed Sullivan Show,
The big band.
the Hollywood Palace,
Yeah, yeah.
the Dick Cavett Show, the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, the David Frost Show. I mean, we were the last generation to see these incredibly gifted jazz artists in the ultimate setting, which is a big band. I dug Ringo, I dug John Paul, etc., and George, but from the from the Beatles, and I dug Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. But when I saw drummers like Sonny Payne and Louis Bellson and Buddy Rich on these TV shows, I said, "Oh my God, this is drumming on a level that I never thought imaginable." Right. And then that morphed into the jazz rock era, etc. And the
So
progressive
is it
era.
fair to say that you then went from the street parties to the clubs?
It was always the same.
It was
same
always
thing.
same thing. It just
you would
was an
just-
extension of it.
Yeah, the street parties, no, the house parties,
House
were
parties.
done over certain celebrations, a birthday, a marriage, a baptism.
Any
That's
reason.
when people would come together. The women had sort of Peter Pan haircuts, and they had these dresses with puppy dogs on them, those large dresses. Everyone smelled good. But remember, their thought was that they were successful, they were working, they lived in the projects, which in those days was a good working place to be.
Right.
And they had a feeling that they were going to get out of there one day. That is, they were upwardly mobile. It's only later that it began to change. So
Later when? In the
I would say,
60s, late 60s?
Around 65, it started getting really
And
bad.
then
And that's the heroin.
You were starting to react to that as a young kid. And
well, yeah,
how did you
I was,
feel then?
First of all,
And don't forget the Vietnam War as well.
First of all,
Right.
I was a Disney kid. I was not affected by race. I thought it was a meritocracy. Young African Americans would come around me and say, Felipe, somehow you're missing the boat. You don't know you're black. You don't know how, and I was raised with black people, as Bobby was. I was raised with them. The difference is that I was immersed in their culture. I love their culture.
Right.
I loved Howling Wolf. I love, what was his name?
Well, you got so many the
no.
early blues playing.
The early blue, I love
Blind
them.
Man Jefferson.
Blind Lemon, yeah. I love that. I love the blues. I loved Ornette Coleman, for that matter. But I was living in two worlds. But I didn't understand the rapaciousness. I didn't understand the filth. I didn't understand the disgusting way we were being treated, because I thought, because I was raised in public schools, and in those days, I had the best public education. The reason he can speak well and reads is because we had a great public education.
Same here, New York City public school.
Yeah. So
Well, I went to Catholic school.
Yeah.
Okay,
wait a minute.
That's a whole different.
But you became radicalized. Is that
I
what
became
politically
radicalized because
then?
I didn't know that there's a core in our society that is evil, that is vulgar, and that is obsessed with power and control. I just didn't understand it. White skin privilege, I didn't understand it. I watched Disney. I loved Dumbo. I loved, and even though the crows say, that'll be the day, and I'll see the elephant fly, and it was a racist depiction, I loved Disney. And by the way, all of those cartoons, all of those Cisco and Pancho, I Love Lucy, Father Knows Best, were great shows. They had no blacks in them, but they were great shows because there was a value system. Be honest, be loyal to your wife, all of that stuff. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was only when I was hit with the specter of racism, particularly when Martin Luther King died, that I saw what hit the fan. I was in Queens College at the time. 1964, I went to jail. And that's when I saw it. That's when I saw the whole thing break down. And it changed my life. My mother says when I came out of jail that I was a different person. I was a different person. You go in and you see it. Now, I'm going to say this and then I'll let Bobby speak. We have to stop viewing these inmates as caricatures. These are men and women there who are souls in distress. And I give them all the credit in the world because they saved my life. They used to say, listen, young blood, I don't want you hanging with, they would tell me, I don't want you hanging out with that guy. I don't want you hanging out. You stay here. They protected me. And it was Muslims who protected me.
Because you were 18. How old were you?
I was 16.
16.
And I was up for murder. These guys protected me. And maybe when I was reading the news to them, or when I was singing them songs, I used to sing them, whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy
From his
tune.
Disney
So
days,
no one will suspect I'm afraid. They loved that stuff.
Yeah, okay.
And they would make me sing it until they went to sleep. I said, wait a minute, these are not criminals. These are not bad guys. They're kids like me. They just want to hear this. They want to be protected. They want to feel safe. Right. And when I didn't sing it, a guy named Diablo, who ran the tier, would say, Philip, sing the song. I said, man, I'm tired, man. I want to go. He said, boy, sing the song.
He wasn't sleepy enough yet.
And what hit the authority of his voice, and he ran the tier, and he was built like an Adonis. You think this guy, The Rock, is built? You should have seen this guy. So I sang right away, and the guys would say, he's stupid. He's crazy, but he's not stupid. So I would sing the song. The point is that I grew up with meritocracy. What I saw in jail, what I saw in civil rights, the civil rights movement, what I saw is it didn't matter how smart you were. It didn't matter how accomplished you were. What mattered was that you were black, and that affected me deeply.
Did the 60s affect you in the same way, or how were you affected? Or were you so into your music? Or
No.
How was your music expressing the turmoil of the time?
I had two things going for me: curiosity and intelligence. and that intelligence led to me going to a school for gifted children from the 6th to the 8th grade.
What school was that?
Called the Monsignor William R. Kelly School, which was run by these progressive Franciscan brothers. It was an experimental school in the Catholic school system.
How did you get into that? Who was
He
a
was
teacher?
smart. He was
Well,
smart.
no, but who directed you to that?
But
was it?
here's where the
Yeah.
specter of racism comes in. That I started experiencing it for the first time in various ways, in different levels. It was an attractive thing because the school was attractive because anybody that viewing this knows that you have to pay tuition for a Catholic school, and Puerto Rican and black families would scrounge up, as you well know, money just to send their kids to have a Catholic-based education to these schools. So this school, if you passed the test, if you were allowed to take the test and you passed it, it was tuition free. The only thing is you had to take the subway to go down to 83rd Street between Amsterdam and Broadway, and the school was there. So they allowed only, and the test was supposed to be allowed to be given to the top percentile of students in the 5th grade class. It was an all boys academy. So, in any case, I was not asked to take the test, even though I was in the top percentile.
Really? Wow.
And through bochinche, gossip, as we say in Spanish, my mother found out, and I felt like lower than low, because I said, they're not asking me to take the test. How come my grades are higher than these other guys?
Thank God for your mother.
Yeah.
I know.
Wow.
My mother went to them and read them the Riot Act, and her broken Spanish, English combination, saying, "Oh no, my son is smart. Why don't you let him take tests? Why don't you? What's wrong with you?" I know why, because he's Puerto Rican, right?
Go ahead, Mom.
She just threw it in their face. So they allowed me to take the test, and I was the only one that passed.
Whoa!
Wow. So you moved out of that Walt Disney World there now. You saw the real face here. I'm beginning
to see, oh my God, people do not like me because I'm of a certain ethnic nationality, whatever. And then, of course, the time period that I grew up in New York City, there were racial divisions going all over across the base, because people were becoming radicalized because of two things: the Vietnam War and Richard Nixon, and of course,
and the civil rights era.
And the third thing was the civil rights era, and of course these assassinations that happened with the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was just horrific. I tell my son sometimes about this time period. He's looking at me. He goes, "Wow, how come you guys didn't rise up and fight?" I go, "We did. We did rise up." You look
That's
at
what the Panthers was about. That's what the Young Lords was about.
Exactly. And also what happened at the convention.
72.
Days of Rage.
Yeah. So and the whole Woodstock generation and this, that, and the other. So,
but still, you were still very serious into your music, and you were aware politically, right? And then you go.
Well, I became socially, politically aware, even more so going to that school,
Berkeley,
with these with these Franciscan brothers.
I see.
Who had us protesting the Vietnam War in Central Park. They told us the whole history of how the U.S. Rubber industry, B.F. Goodrich and other Goodyear at the time, were getting rubber from Vietnam, et cetera, and they had a vested interest in. I mean, it was amazing. It was just like constantly eye-opening every day at school. So I became radicalized, for lack of a better word. My definition of somebody who is a radical is somebody who is socially conscious but actively tries to do something,
which is
to
certainly
right around.
what you were doing.
And
I mean, you really put yourself on the line there, right?
Then
literally,
I saw what the Young Lords was doing, and I was too young to join. But then
your mother would have killed you.
I heard him on the radio.
Yeah, you were saying that.
I heard him. He had a show called Latin Roots on the then only 24-hour jazz station that New York City had, which was WRVR, coming out of the Riverside
Funded
Church.
by the Rockefellers because they didn't want to go to church. They wanted to have the church come to them. So they built a radio station so it could be transmitted to them. That's money.
And
That's serious money.
Absolutely.
And it was a great station, by the way.
And all of a sudden, besides listening to his show on Sundays, I noticed also that there were things that were just incorrect. Like I remember Les Davis, the great DJ, jazz DJ, who I believe is still alive. He had a show on. So I called up. In those days, you could call up the station and ask for a request. So I call up, but he didn't answer the phone. Somebody answered the phone else. He goes, "Can I get, hi, is Mr. Davis there?" He goes, "Yeah, but what do you want?" He goes, can you play Cuban Fantasy by Cal Jader? You know? This fantastic jazz mambo that has an incredible timbala solo by Willie Bob. He goes, we don't play any Latin music. I go, what are you talking about?
Wow.
It's jazz, you know? And he goes, yeah, well, if you want to listen to that, listen to Felipe's show on Sundays.
Interesting.
And I go, but what are you talking about, man? It's Cal Jader is a jazz artist.
musician.
He's a legend.
You had to fight for that category to be included, right? Latin jazz.
And he fought well for it.
In
They had
the
excluded
various
it.
award.
They excluded it
We're
from the
talking
narrative.
about the Grammys.
The
We're talking
Grammys,
about,
yeah. But that was
about 12 years, 13 years ago. We had to fight because they had taken it away. They took away the category, and we had to
Why?
fight to get it reinstated.
He's not telling you the whole story. He
All
also was taken from a position in the Manhattan School of Music. He had one of the greatest young bands that I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot. These kids adored him. He would have concerts, and the sound harmonically coming out of that, the different textures, the flavor, the nuance of the band was absolutely incredible. And do you know that the Manhattan School of Music told him to leave? They told him to leave because they didn't like
His
the Latin
influence?
music.
No.
Well, tell me.
Let's
All
get
right.
it straight.
All right.
The orchestra existed, the Manhattan School of Music Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra existed for 20 years. I taught it for 20 years. In that time period, we did 3 albums, and 2 of them were nominated for Grammys. We did dozens of concerts, and we united the whole Harlem and New
was
York City
wonderful.
community.
It was wonderful.
It was blacks, whites,
But
Asians,
why did they let you
Hispanics.
go?
Right.
And then what happened was somebody came in 5 years ago into the school, into the jazz department. A new person came in and told me, "You're not going to teach the orchestra anymore." I go, "What am I going to be? What are you talking about? You're going to be teaching in a small group. We're just going to have the orchestra for 2 weeks out of every semester. They're going to meet for every day for 2 weeks." I go, "There's no way they can learn how to play this music in 2 weeks time. There's no way they can learn how to write this music, arrange this music, me coach them." So I stayed on for another year following their paradigm, which was to teach a small group, okay? And their thing was to get a guest conductor to come in, etc. It was a failure. It was a failure. It was a failure.
Well, it's the pettiness of the academic.
No, what it
world.
was.
In any case,
What it was,
in any case,
he likes to gloss over this. What it was is they didn't want Latin music jazz.
Yeah.
Latin jazz, they felt it wasn't a legitimate form of music. It had to be more classical jazz. And this is the kind of destructive division that happens in the music community. It's destructive.
To make a long story short, I quit. I resigned and
Shame
I
on
was
them.
I wanted to take over the school. So Bobby I want to take it over. Let's do a demonstration. Bobby is much more.
Well, you're right
very
next door in
intense.
Union there.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that's right.
Need to take that over too. So.
Yeah, but we should have.
It was so sad because
Yeah.
the Harlem Chamber of Commerce was behind us. I mean, we united the whole entire Harlem community on a level that had never been seen before.
They didn't
other
want to
than
see that.
during the Palladium Ballroom when it existed.
And they
from
still didn't take
1960.
him back.
You know, well, I resigned, so it wasn't.
All right, well,
so it was
You were disrespected.
I
And your
think so.
music.
Exactly.
Come on.
Exactly,
I think so.
Exactly. Not I think so. I was.
We
I
know
was,
so.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
so-
okay, now we're.
But when
All right, go
the
ahead.
thing is, when they disrespect me, that means they disrespect the entire
The
community.
entire
Absolutely.
community. I agree. I agree.
Absolutely.
And people wrote in to them I tried to speak to the head of the school. No return phone calls. Nothing.
Yeah.
So
I
there
know
you
it.
go. But I continue my work at the for the 28th year at the New School University, where I teach the orchestra there. And we've
Okay.
had anybody that in New York City goes to see any orchestra that's playing here in New York City, big band. Where some of my children, some of my ex-students are in
That's
those
nice. That's the way you say that is beautiful.
You know?
But let me bring us a little more to the recent times here. What do you think Manhattan School of Music would say now after your incredible album, West Side Story Reimagined? They should be so ashamed.
It's hilarious because that was a result of my teaching at the school.
Right.
Because that was a project that I had the students do, and
Really?
I used several students that were composition arranging majors, and some composer arrangers from my own orchestra as well as myself, and I put that project together for the students to learn about Maestro Bernstein's incredible legacy and how he combined orchestral music, opera, jazz,
It's beautiful.
Latin.
West Side Story is
Latin,
beautiful.
and it became, and we test drove it at the school. The Bernstein family was there. They were completely flabbergasted.
We had you on with Jamie Bernstein.
Right.
So
then what happened was I said the music was just too difficult for the students to perform, and it was also too long. It was 2.5 hours. I cut it down to an hour and a half. And I said to myself, this has to be recorded and done with my own big band. And that's what we did. We did it live at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola. Right. And the result was the Grammy nomination, and also what was more important was that the Jazz Journalists Association, which are the greatest jazz writers in the world, voted it the album of the year. So that meant more to us than anything else. And we have a new album coming out with the same orchestra. Recorded live at Dizzy's. We just recorded it this past June. It'll be entitled Vox Humana, Human Voice. And it features 3 of the greatest jazz vocalists living today. Janis Siegel from the Manhattan Transfer, Antoinette Montague from the Duke Ellington Orchestra, and a young talent who used to be a student of mine over 20 years ago at the New School, Jennifer Jade Ledesma, who is half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, grew up in the Bronx, and speaks fluent Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, and French, and sings in all those languages as well as English. So we're very happy, and it's a departure for me because I've always wanted to do this, but never could find the right 3 vocalists, and finally I found them. Each one of them are individuals, each one of them have their own style, and each one of them are great jazz improvisers. The entire album is all vocals.
Bobby is underplaying his role in our community. He is probably the hardest working musician in our community. That includes all of the big bands. He doesn't stop. He is a veritable laboratory, research encyclopedia of music. When you listen to a Bobby Sanabria concert, you're getting jazz, you're getting the Cotton Club, the Savoy, Palladium, Cotton Club, you're getting all of that. And he does it while he's drumming. It is a wonderful musical spectacle to behold because he gives you a sense of how this came from Africa to the Caribbean and to New York. He does that. Now, we do not have a political generation. This generation was not brought up fighting for their rights. And that's one of the problems. Because when you're brought up kicking ass because you feel insulted, degraded, humiliated, or killed, you learn that nothing comes from nothing. And you learn, as Max Weber, this great sociologist, said, institutions do not change because of their moral quality. They change because you push them.
Yeah.
You got to force people to change, as Rousseau said. And so I came from that generation. I come from the generation, you are not going to step over me. And if you do, you're going to pay for it. It may be a Pyrrhic victory, but you're going to pay. Now, therein lies the difference. Yeah. Because while we were fighting in the streets, this music was pulsating. Eddie Palmieri would come to our demonstrations. Ray Barretto would come. That's right. Tito Puente would come.
Jerry Gonzalez.
Jerry Gonzalez.
And the Fort Apache Man.
One of the greatest musicians to have come from our culture. Fort Apache band, and his brother Andy. They were a duo and a half.
That band virtually started because Evelina Antonetti, who was protesting the filming
Of Fort Apache.
Fort Apache, the Bronx, with Paul Newman, she asked Jerry, "Can you come and entertain the protesters when we have a break?" And just to give some positive reinforcement to them. So eventually Jerry said, "I got to continue the
tradition,
this group," and he made it into what became the Fort Apache band.
Antonetti, Evelyn Antonetti, was also the woman who came when the Young Lords took over the first Spanish Methodist church. She would come to the church with pots of meat, rice, and say, "Hot stuff, hot stuff, hot stuff," and she fed us. So we love her very much. She was quite a paragon of civic responsibility. She passed away a few years ago, but she is a remarkable woman.
We just celebrated her centennial.
Sounds like,
and she's a woman that needs to be known, not only in the Puerto Rican community here in New York City, but also on the island, because there's a unfortunate division between island Puerto Ricans and New Yorkers, and that division has to be.
Well, we have Martha Vega there.
Yeah.
Martha Vega's there. Thank God.
Yeah.
We have several people. Dilcia Pagan is there. We have people who are fighting to give to the island and to receive from the island.
because there's more Puerto Ricans here, right?
Yes, there are. Yes,
so
there
that's
it's stateside.
diaspora.
But there still is, and he's right. There still is a cultural differentiation.
Yeah.
You're from there. We're from here. Now, here's the positive thing about being from here. We know how to fight. We're close to black people. We've grown up in the civil rights tradition, and we're not having it. Over there's a colonialism that besots the radical spirit. It enervates your spirit. You don't want to fight because you're not supposed to fight. And when I go there and I start talking to them, you see they start going like this. They don't want to hear that stuff. And my thing this nation, and I want to say this, our nation, Puerto Rico, was bombed in 1950 by the United States because they wanted the revolution to stop. Albizu Campos tried to bring our case before the United Nations, and he started an armed revolution.
Right.
And they bombed Jayuya, they bombed Calle, they bombed Peñuelas. I mean, they bombed it. And so I say there is no freedom that you get free. You've got to fight for it. And so I grew up in that tradition. Now, the musicians, it's interesting because during that period, Eddie Palmieri, not during that period, in the 60s, Eddie Palmieri, La Justicia was one.
Right, and in the concert at the University of Puerto Rico that he did.
That was great with Charlie.
And then also Vámonos Pa' Monte, that album that he did, where he recorded a song called
And then Ruben carried the tradition on.
La Libertad, Lógico, that's right.
Ruben Blades carried the tradition. What I'm saying is this, without artists, without Bobby, without Jerry, without the new thing called the Mambo Legends Orchestra, we have no legacy. Artists are our vision. And if the nation has no
my
vision,
opening. I agree.
If
Totally.
the nation without a vision perishes,
Absolutely.
it really does. And our music now is vibrant. What we have to learn to do is to take advantage of it and move it forward. The Cubans have an interesting history. They push their musicians, and we need to do that.
And we have an interesting history with Cuba.
Okay, go ahead.
Because we ourselves, Puerto Ricans, there would be no Cuban music in the United States if it wasn't for the Puerto Rican community. But to Felipe's point about in Puerto Rico, they don't know. He states they don't know how to fight. Remember what happened with the uprising against the then governor, Rosselló.
Yeah, right. A million people came out.
We have
the spirit.
We have that spirit in us, and if it's galvanized, it can be used in an effective, positive
And you
way.
galvanize it so much. I mean, use Bernstein, who is considered, as you consider,
He's a genius.
the greatest American composer, who was also influenced by Aaron Copland and other figures.
Stravinsky, everybody.
Stravinsky,
Yeah,
the classical tradition. So
Hector
on.
Villalobos from Brazil.
That's what I was going to ask you too about the influence of some of the Spanish, more classical composers on your music, on Bernstein's music, and so on. Villalobos, you mentioned, well, Brazilian.
Manuel de Falla.
De Falla, Albanese, Granados. Is that part of the mix too that we need to do?
Yeah, because it's part of the DNA in there already.
Exactly.
So a young person who's a musician today listening to a certain artist might hear a lick, and they don't in a composition they don't realize it comes from Hector Villalobos originally, or Manuel de Falla, etc.
Exactly.
So all of this is in our DNA musically, etc., etc. The whole thing is to uncover the layers of the onion and make sure that you see where everything comes from.
And that's what you're talking about.
That's what I'm saying. Look, we had Orquesta Aragon from Cuba that mixed the tradition of European lyricism, the violin, and the drum. We have learned slowly that we are, and it's difficult to put this all together, but we are a mixture of three basic racial groups. It is the Spaniard, of course, it is the Native American, the Taino, and it is, of course, the African. The major African groups in Puerto Rican culture are from the Congo and from Gambia, from Dahomey, and from Nigeria. Nigeria had much more of an impact than I've ever thought. And the more I look at it, Nigeria's had tremendous impact on all of it. But what permeated through everything was the African rhythm. And that is what, and in Haiti, by the way, it caused the revolution. It was the rhythm in Haiti that induced these warriors to go forward and die if they needed to. All I'm saying is that it's important now that we understand who we are. When you were talking about the artists who reflect the European tradition, if you hear Chico O'Farrell's music, you'll say you can't believe it. It's so wonderful. He was able to canvas the entire spectrum of Latin music, including classical music, and play it. We have, Noro Morales, a pianist who was tremendous. We have tremendous guys. We just need to exploit it. We need to dig into it more and give our kids a sense of what this music is.
And also the jazz community in general has to recognize that as well, because there is an unfortunate disconnect in the jazz community from a historical perspective, giving credit to the influence of Latin musicians throughout the history of jazz. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at the 18 hours of Ken Burns, and you'll notice that there's nothing about our contributions to the history of jazz.
And yet all of the musicians say, John Storm Roberts has something called a Latin tinge. And he says that if it were not for the Cuban musicians crossing the bay, crossing the
sea,
the Mexican, what is it?
The Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of Mexico. New Orleans wouldn't have had the music. Everyone knew that. Everyone. Louis Armstrong said it. I mean, it wasn't just me.
The interconnected.
Louis Armstrong's. Here's a for instance. A lot of jazz historians say, well, those are just little minor types, little influences, this, that, footnotes, and I go, but when you start adding those footnotes all up, you start going, oh my God, there's a major disrespect that has been perpetrated on the Latino musical community in terms of its relationship to the history of jazz. For example, Manuel Perez. You know who Manuel Perez was?
I've heard.
Manuel Perez was the trumpeter in the Olympia Brass Band. He was Louis Armstrong's main influence.
Wow.
Where's Manuel Perez from? Cuba.
You
know, Louis King got Louis King.
We have only a few minutes. I very much want to get this question because I know our friend and comrade Cornel West just had a recent interview in which he, there is no progressive politics without internationalism. It seems like you're both talking about that. Let me just read a couple of short paragraphs here. This is Cornell. For me, internationalism is always a starting point because without it, you're not going to be able to see a number of things, including the limitations and shortcomings of your own government, especially its domestic and foreign policy. Today, nationalism is the most powerful ideology in the modern world, where nation states sit at the center of one's life. It's got a monopoly on violence and the institutions of public administration. It shapes the discourse in terms of how people understand their everyday life. Nationalism to me is so often an impediment, an obstacle that doesn't allow us to see how nation states are connected to other nation states. In my own case, how an empire is connected to other nation states. Last point, we must have an alternative. And that's what multinational and international solidarity is all about. Without institutional capacity, even the grandest international visions remain in the abstract. These visions have to be embodied, they have to be enacted, they have to be institutionalized.
What does Machiavelli say about the melding of cultures? He says, be careful of the grand move, because you can be absorbed in that. And I agree with Cornell 100%.
Yeah.
But if we don't have positive nationalism, the reason we're not respected in the black community is because we haven't kicked ass. It's as simple as that. We haven't sat down and said, count, all of you, listen to my music, and this is it. Because let me tell you something, it was the guys like Quincy Jones, it was guys like Maynard Ferrer, who were going to the Palladium to listen to Machito, to listen to Tito Puente, and hear what he was doing. He was incredible. So it gets me annoyed when I hear these kinds of things, because, and I love Cornell, but nationalism in its proper context is needed. If you knew the truth, you would understand what he was saying earlier, that Puerto Ricans propagated the spread of Latin music across the world, because we took Latin albums with us to Japan, we took them with us to Okinawa, we took it with us to Europe,
made
to
a
Italy.
global phenomenon. I think that's what he's talking about too, isn't he? Or what do you make of this?
The only thing I have to say is that's why I call my orchestra the multiverse.
Multiverse.
The multiverse.
I wanted to ask you, why that term?
Because Octavio Paz, my wife Elena Martinez, the great folklorist and cultural anthropologist, hit me to the writings of the great Mexican poet Octavio Paz, where he talks about the multiverse. It's a gigantic salad, and you could see all of it tastes fantastic, but you could see all of the different colors, the different ingredients in there, all working in harmony to give you this incredible flavor, this incredible dish. And that's on every level. That's what I do. That's what I do.
I want to
make this point.
Okay, then make
Jim Vrettos.
Yes.
As Puerto Ricans, he and I love him.
Yeah.
And I don't care what you say.
Okay.
He's my brother.
Right.
And I want him to succeed. I want him to do well. And I will fight on all levels to push his music. The problem we have, and I think it's a challenge as Puerto Ricans, is we do not decide to embody what we believe. We do not decide to put our lives on the line. Albizu Campos said, La patria es valor y sacrificio. The country, the fatherland is valor and sacrifice. We need to understand that if we want to be respected, we have to fight for it. Nobody's going to give you anything. There was a group here in this community called the Viceroys, and they were so powerful that you couldn't come into this community and act stupid. The Sicilians who were here, who were good fighters, respected us. You couldn't come in and just grab a girl. It was not happening. We need to do that again.
Oh, I'm being told we need to say goodbye. And we can go on and on and on. You're raising some great points at the end here. Last point here.
Are you going to pay us, man?
Yeah. Our producers have got the money all right. Now listen. How do we listen to your show where, and your show where?
My show is on WBGO, WB as in Bobby, G as in God, O as in Oscar, FM 88.3 if you want to listen to it old school, or you can listen to WBGO.org on the computer or the app. Yeah. And it's on Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the Latin Jazz
very simple.
Cruise.
Saturdays from 2 to 4, WBAI, the only progressive radio station in New York City.
There we go.
WBAI, Saturdays 99.5 FM, Saturdays from 2 to 4 p.m.
2 to 4.
And 4 to 6
and
on
4
Saturdays.
All right,
so there you go.
There we go.
Brother.
Listen to me.
Time is up.
Him.
Thank you so very, very much, guys. Thank you so very much for listening to us this week on The Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.
Give me that money, man. I want that money.
Here, how about this?
Hell no. Hell no.
Oh, no. Okay.